That morning, my father slapped me. It wasn't loud enough to wake the neighbors or violent enough to leave a mark that anyone would ask about. It was precise, controlled, like everything else in our house. A reminder, not a loss of control. A message delivered in a language he knew I understood. I stood there, frozen, my cheek burning, my heart louder than my breath. The kitchen smelled of unfinished breakfast. Toast had gone cold on the counter. The clock above the sink ticked too clearly, each second stretching longer than the last. My mother stood with her back to me, stirring tea as if nothing had happened. She didn't turn around. She never did. My brother leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching. Not shocked. Not concerned. Just curious, like someone observing a familiar routine. "What did I tell you about talking back?" my father said. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I had only asked a question. That was all. A simple question about my future, about school, about whether I could choose something for myself just once. But questions were dangerous in this house. Questions sounded like defiance. And defiance, according to him, needed correction. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. The words came automatically, trained into my tongue long before I understood them. Apologies were my first language. My father exhaled, satisfied. "Learn when to stay quiet." And I did. I lowered my eyes. I nodded. I stepped back into my place, slightly to the side, slightly smaller, like I had learned to be. My cheek throbbed, but I didn't touch it. Touching it would make it real. Touching it might make me cry. I didn't cry. I washed the dishes instead. The cold water numbed my fingers as I scrubbed plates we hadn't finished eating from. Behind me, my brother laughed at something on his phone. My mother carried her tea to the living room. Life continued, uninterrupted, as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just been reminded that my voice was optional. But something inside me had changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It didn't break or scream or demand attention. It simply went quiet in a way it had never been before. A deep, heavy quiet. Like the moment before a storm, when the air holds its breath. I realized then that this wasn't a single moment, it was a pattern. 1,000 small silences stacked on top of each other. Every time I was overlooked. Every time my brother was praised for what I was expected to do without thanks. Every time I swallowed words because peace mattered more than truth. I had always believed that if I stayed kind, stayed patient, stayed useful, things would change. That morning, I understood they never would. I dried my hands and looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The girl staring back at me looked calm. Obedient. Fine. But behind her eyes, someone was packing up. I stayed quiet for the rest of the day. And for the first time, that silence wasn't obedience. It was distance. By afternoon, the house had returned to its usual rhythm, as if the morning had never happened. The slap was already becoming one of those unspoken things, real, but not acknowledged. In our family, pain only existed if it was loud enough to inconvenience others. I moved through the rooms quietly, collecting laundry, folding blankets, wiping surfaces that were already clean. I had learned long ago that staying busy made me less visible, and being less visible kept me safe. This was my role. The helper. The shadow. I was the one who remembered what everyone liked to eat, who noticed when the milk ran out, who adjusted my schedule to fit everyone else's needs. If something went wrong in the house, it somehow traced its way back to me. If something went right, it belonged to my brother. He came home late that afternoon, tossing his keys onto the table like the world belonged to him. "What's for dinner?" he asked, already opening the fridge. "I'll make something special," I said. The word surprised even me. He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Look at that. Dad finally got through to you." I smiled, the kind of smile I had perfected over the years, soft, agreeable, empty. Inside, something cold and clear was forming. Not anger exactly. Understanding. I went into the kitchen and began preparing dinner. Cooking had always been my language. When I didn't know how to explain myself, I cooked. When I wanted peace, I cooked. It was the one thing no one criticized, the one space where I was allowed to be skilled without threatening anyone. I chopped vegetables slowly, methodically. Each sound of the knife against the cutting board grounded me. I thought about all the meals I had made to earn approval that never lasted longer than the last bite. As the food simmered, memories rose with the steam. Being told to let my brother speak first. Being told I was too sensitive. Being praised for sacrifice, never for ambition. I realized then how easily they mistook endurance for acceptance. They believed my silence meant agreement. That my service meant loyalty. That staying meant I was content. They had never asked. My mother passed through the kitchen, peering into the pots. "This smells nice," she said. "Your father will be pleased." I nodded. "I hope so." What I didn't say was that this dinner wasn't for his pleasure. It was for closure. By the time evening approached, the table was set more carefully than it ever had been. Candles. Proper plates. The good serving dishes that were usually saved for guests who mattered. I was calm. Strangely calm. My brother walked in, surveyed the spread, and laughed. "Wow. All this because you got scolded?" He took a seat, confident, comfortable. Finally, he said again, shaking his head. "She understands." I watched him for a moment, really watched him. How easily he assumed the world bent in his favor. How little he questioned it. And I understood something else then. They had underestimated me not because I was weak, but because they never believed I was capable of leaving. I turned back to the stove, stirring the final dish, my hands steady. Dinner was almost ready. And so was I. Evening settled over the house slowly, draping everything in a soft golden light that made it look warmer than it truly was. From the outside, anyone would have thought we were a family preparing for a celebration. Laughter drifted from the living room. Plates clinked. The smell of roasted spices filled the air. No one would have guessed this was a farewell. I moved between the kitchen and the dining room with practiced ease, placing dishes on the table one by one. Every plate was deliberate. Every serving spoon carefully aligned. I had set the table the way my mother once taught me: symmetry, order, perfection. Appearances mattered here more than truth ever had. My mother adjusted a candle and smiled. "You've really outdone yourself tonight." "I wanted it to be nice," I replied. And I meant it. Just not for the reasons she assumed. My father hadn't taken his seat yet. His chair at the head of the table stood empty, larger than the others, like a silent reminder of who held power in this house. No one questioned its emptiness. We all knew he would arrive when he was ready, and the rest of us would wait. My brother was already seated, relaxed, scrolling through his phone. He sampled food before anyone else, as he always did, nodding with approval. "This is good," he said. "You're learning." I felt no sting at his words. That part of me was already gone. We began eating without my father, something that would have once terrified me. Tonight, it felt necessary. Each bite tasted rich, layered, complete, like a story reaching its final pages. The doorbell rang. The sound cut cleanly through the room, sharp and unexpected. My mother frowned. Who could that be? I wiped my hands on a towel. "I'll get it." As I walked down the hallway, my heart remained steady. I had imagined this moment too many times for fear to survive it. The doorknob felt cool under my palm as I turned it. The door opened, and the evening air rushed in. "Come in," I said softly. Footsteps followed me back toward the dining room, unhurried, confident. The conversation at the table faded into uneasy silence as they noticed I wasn't alone. My father appeared from the hallway just as we entered the room. He stopped mid-step. For a moment, no one spoke. The person beside me took a seat at the head of the table, the seat no one else dared touch. The chair creaked slightly under the weight of history, of authority being reclaimed. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "You can't be serious," she whispered. My brother stood halfway, his face pale. "What is this?" I remained standing. "This," I said, my voice calm, "is dinner." The candles flickered, casting shadows across faces suddenly unsure of themselves. The table that had always felt like a place of hierarchy now felt like a stage, and the script had changed. My father's jaw tightened. "You had no right." I met his eyes for the first time that day. Truly met them. "I invited who I wanted," I said. "Just like you always do." The person at the head of the table folded their hands, composed, unafraid. Their presence alone rewrote the rules of the room. No yelling. No chaos. Just truth sitting quietly where power once lived. And for the first time in my life, I felt the weight shift, not because I demanded it, but because I had stopped carrying it alone. The room had gone completely silent. Even the clinking of cutlery seemed to pause, suspended in the thick tension. My family's faces reflected a mix of shock, anger, and confusion, and for once, I didn't feel small. I felt present. Powerful in a way that had nothing to do with yelling or fighting. At the head of the table sat my grandmother. The woman who had raised me when my parents were too busy chasing appearances to notice me, the woman who had whispered truths into my ears when the rest of the house spoke only lies. She had been gone from our home for years, a casualty of their pride and their stubbornness, yet here she was. Calm. Steady. Unmovable. My father's hand twitched toward his chair, but he didn't sit. His face burned with shame, a mix of rage and disbelief, because this was a seat he had always considered his domain. "You can't do this," he said, his voice cracking with fury. "You had no right to." "You had no right either," my grandmother interrupted, her voice firm but quiet, like a bell ringing in a still forest. She didn't yell, she didn't plead, she simply stated a truth that could not be ignored. "Neither did you. Not when you refused to see her. Not when you refused to hear her. Not when you decided she was invisible." I stepped closer to her and brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "This is the dinner I cooked for myself," I said softly, letting each word land. "Not for approval. Not for forgiveness. Not for anyone but the girl I used to be, the one who spent years shrinking to make the world comfortable." My brother opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He had never seen me like this, not really. I wasn't trembling, I wasn't apologetic, I wasn't small. I was calm. I was solid. I was finally visible. I gestured toward the table. "You see all of this?" I asked. "All the work, all the effort, all the love I poured into something I was told wouldn't matter? It wasn't for you. It was for me. It's a goodbye. Goodbye to the girl who waited for permission, goodbye to the fear, goodbye to the idea that your approval defines me." My mother's eyes were wide with disbelief, shimmering with something between sorrow and regret. She opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to apologize, but no sound came. And then I did something I had never allowed myself to do. I sat down. Not at the side, not behind anyone, not in servitude. I sat where I belonged. At the head of the table. I looked at my grandmother and smiled. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded, her hand briefly brushing mine, grounding me in the courage I had gathered. "I'm leaving," I said aloud now, my voice carrying through the room. "I'm leaving this house. I'm leaving the fear. I'm leaving the silence. I have a life to build, one where my voice matters, where my worth isn't measured by obedience, and where I am allowed to exist fully." My father slumped slightly, defeated, not by force, but by clarity. My brother sank into his chair, unsure of where to go or what to say. My mother's lips quivered, but she remained silent. And for the first time I felt free. Not because I had hurt them. Not because I had shouted or thrown or fought. But because I had claimed myself. The sweetest revenge, I realized, wasn't in breaking them. It was in walking away whole. It was in taking my life, my choices, and my voice, and refusing to hand them back to anyone who had ever tried to control me. I lifted my chin, took a deep breath, and allowed the warmth of the room, now quiet in a new way, to fill me. I was no longer the girl who stayed quiet. I was the woman who chose herself. And the head of the table had never felt so right.